What if I told you that a single battle in a remote Vietnamese valley changed the course of world history? That peasant farmers using bamboo spikes defeated history's most feared military machine not once, but 3 times? And that the secret weapon which made all of this possible wasn't advanced technology or superior numbers, but something far more powerful? By the end of this video, you'll discover how Vietnam became the graveyard of empires, and why this small Southeast Asian nation holds the key to understanding modern warfare, colonial resistance, and the unstoppable force of human determination. Our story begins 65,000 years ago in the fertile Red River Delta, where early humans first settled what would become Vietnam. But it is not until the 7th century BCE that we encounter the Van Lang Kingdom and the birth of Vietnamese civilization. Archaeological evidence reveals sophisticated bronze working techniques, including the famous Dong Sun drums that became eternal symbols of Vietnamese culture. Yet even these early achievements pale beside the legend that truly captures Vietnam's essence. According to Vietnamese mythology, their first kingdom emerged from the union of a dragon king and a mountain fairy, a tale that perfectly reflects Vietnam's geography. Caught between the waters of the South China Sea and the mountains stretching toward China. This brings us to 111 BCE and the beginning of Vietnam's greatest trial. The mighty Han Dynasty of China swept into the Red River Delta, beginning what would become one of history's longest foreign occupations. For over 1,000 years, Vietnam remained under Chinese control, yet this period would forge the Vietnamese character in ways that would echo through history. The Chinese brought advanced agricultural techniques, writing systems, and administrative structures. They introduced Confucian philosophy and Buddhist teachings. But here's what makes Vietnam's story remarkable. Instead of being absorbed like other conquered territories, the Vietnamese absorbed what was useful while fiercely protecting their own identity. This resistance wasn't just cultural, it was literal and bloody. In 40 CE, 2 sisters named Trung Trec and Trung Ni led the first major rebellion against Chinese rule. These warrior queens, riding war elephants into battle, briefly liberated their homeland. Though their rebellion was crushed 3 years later, the Trung sisters became eternal symbols, proving that the spirit of independence burned bright even under foreign rule. For 9 centuries, Vietnamese resistance movements rose and fell, each teaching valuable lessons about guerrilla warfare and popular support. The Chinese controlled cities and formal government, but they could never truly control the Vietnamese people. Then came 939 CE, the date that changed everything. Under Ngo Quyen, Vietnamese forces achieved the impossible. They expelled the Chinese. The victory at Bac Dang River was military genius. Ngo Quyen planted sharpened stakes in the riverbed at low tide, then lured the Chinese fleet into the trap. When the tide receded, Chinese ships were impaled and helpless, ending a millennium of foreign rule. But independence brought new challenges. The Lai dynasty, established in 1009, proved Vietnam could govern itself by creating a centralized government that blended Chinese efficiency with Vietnamese values. Under Emperor Lai Tai Teo, the capital was established in Hanoi, called Phang Long Ascending Dragon. This success attracted attention from an unexpected quarter, the Mongol Empire. By the 13th century, Mongols had conquered from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. Their armies had never met defeat, and now they turned to Vietnam. What followed was one of history's greatest David versus Goliath stories. Between 1257 and 1287, Mongols launched 3 massive invasions. The Vietnamese response was led by General Tran Hung Dao, who pioneered tactics that would echo through Vietnamese military history. Realizing conventional warfare was impossible, he employed strategic retreat, scorched earth policies, and guerrilla warfare that turned Vietnam's geography into a weapon. Mongol armies, accustomed to swift victories, found themselves bogged down in swamps, harassed by militias, unable to secure supply lines. Vietnamese people became a vast intelligence network tracking Mongol movements and sabotaging operations. The climax came in 1288 at the Second Battle of Bach Dang River. Once again, sharpened stakes planted in riverbed destroyed an invading fleet. The Mongol commander barely escaped, and the myth of Mongol invincibility shattered in Vietnamese waters. This victory had profound implications beyond Vietnam's borders. If a small Southeast Asian kingdom could defeat Mongols, perhaps they weren't invincible. The psychological impact contributed to internal conflicts that eventually tore the Mongol Empire apart, but Vietnam's trials continued. The next centuries brought civil wars and another Chinese occupation from 1407 to 1427. However, each challenge strengthened Vietnamese resolve. Le Loi's successful rebellion established the Le dynasty, presiding over Vietnam's golden age. Under the Le dynasty, Vietnam expanded southward, conquering the Kampa Kingdom and pushing into the Mekong Delta, creating the Vietnam we recognize today. Vietnamese literature flourished with epic poems like The Tale of Kieu becoming central to Vietnamese identity. Yet, as Vietnam thrived, new challenges emerged from the sea. Portuguese traders arrived in 1516, followed by French, Dutch, and British merchants. Initially, European impact was modest. Christian missionaries established themselves and created a Romanized script for Vietnamese called Quoc Ngu. But by the mid-19th century, European ambitions had grown. The French, led by Napoleon III, decided Vietnam would become the cornerstone of French Indochina, a colonial empire rivaling British India. The French conquest began in 1858 with the bombardment of Da Nang and continued for over 3 decades. The Vietnamese fought with characteristic determination, but this time was different. The French possessed overwhelming technological advantages: steam-powered gunboats, modern artillery, breech-loading rifles. More importantly, they committed whatever resources necessary for victory. By 1884, French control was complete. Vietnam was divided into 3 regions: Tonkin in the north, Annam in the center, and Cochinchina in the south. French rule brought railways, roads, and telegraph lines, but beneath this progress lay brutal exploitation. Heavy taxes, seized lands, and forced labor created widespread poverty while Vietnamese were treated as second-class citizens. This oppression bred resistance, and from this ferment emerged one of the 20th century's most influential leaders, Ho Chi Minh. Born in 1890, he left Vietnam as a young man, traveling the world and studying Marxist theory. By the 1920s, he had become the leading voice of Vietnamese nationalism. World War II provided Ho Chi Minh's opportunity. When Germany defeated France in 1940, the colonial administration became isolated. Japan moved into Vietnam, and Ho Chi Minh established the Viet Minh in 1941, organizing resistance cells and training guerrilla fighters. The moment came in August 1945. With Japan surrendering and France recovering from war, Vietnam found itself in a power vacuum. On September 2, 1945, Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnamese independence, establishing the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. But France wasn't ready to surrender its most valuable colony. In 1946, French forces returned, leading to the First Indochina War. 8 years of brutal conflict culminating in one of history's most dramatic military defeats. The Viet Minh, led by General Vo Nguyen Giap, pioneered warfare combining guerrilla tactics with conventional operations. They struck by night and melted away by day, recruited village support, and turned Vietnam's terrain into their weapon. The climax came at Dien Bien Phu. In late 1953, French commanders established a fortified base in this remote valley, hoping to lure the Viet Minh into conventional battle where French firepower could destroy them. It was a fatal miscalculation. General Giap accepted the challenge on his terms. Throughout winter 1953-54, thousands of Vietnamese workers hauled artillery through jungle paths French believed impassable. They dug tunnels, constructed trenches, and positioned guns on heights surrounding the French base. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu, fought from March 13 to May 7, 1954, shocked the world. After 57 days of siege, at least 2,200 French forces died, 1,729 were missing, and 11,721 were captured. The fortress meant to demonstrate French invincibility became the symbol of French defeat. Dien Bien Phu led to the Geneva Conference of 1954, dividing Vietnam at the 17th parallel. North Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh would be communist, South Vietnam would be non-communist. The division was temporary, with reunification elections scheduled for 1956. Those elections never occurred. The United States, fearing Ho Chi Minh would win, supported South Vietnam's refusal to participate. This guaranteed Vietnam's reunification struggle would continue through military means. What followed became known to Americans as the Vietnam War. But to Vietnamese, it was simply continuation of their independence struggle. The conflict wasn't really civil war. It was the final act in Vietnam's thousand-year fight against foreign domination. The numbers tell a story of unimaginable tragedy. Vietnam's official estimate: as many as 2 million civilians on both sides and 1.1 million North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fighters died. American military fatal casualties totaled 58,220. The war's turning point came with the Tet Offensive of 1968, a coordinated assault on over 100 South Vietnamese cities during the Tet holiday. While militarily unsuccessful for North Vietnam, Tet shattered American confidence in military progress. Television footage of fighting in Saigon streets and the temporary capture of the U.S. Embassy compound convinced millions of Americans that victory was impossible. The offensive revealed the true genius of Vietnamese strategy. They understood that wars aren't won solely on battlefields, they're won in the minds of people. By demonstrating their ability to strike anywhere, anytime, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army proved that no amount of American firepower could guarantee security. What followed was America's gradual disengagement. The policy of Vietnamization attempted to transfer fighting responsibility to South Vietnamese forces while American troops withdrew. But this strategy faced an insurmountable problem. The South Vietnamese government lacked the popular legitimacy that sustained North Vietnam through decades of sacrifice. The final chapter began in December 1974 when North Vietnamese forces launched their last major offensive. What they expected to be a 2-year campaign collapsed South Vietnamese resistance in just 4 months. City after city fell with surprising speed, revealing how hollow South Vietnam's strength had become without American support. By April 1975, North Vietnamese tanks were racing toward Saigon. On April 30th, Tank 843 crashed through the gates of the Independence Palace, ending not just the Vietnam War but America's first major military defeat. The images of helicopters evacuating Americans from embassy rooftops became enduring symbols of superpower limitations. Victory was complete, but the cost enormous. Vietnam lay in ruins, its people exhausted by 30 years of almost continuous warfare. Yet once again, Vietnamese showed remarkable resilience. The real transformation began in the late 1980s with Doi Moi Bud economic renovation. These market-oriented reforms opened Vietnam to foreign investment and international trade while maintaining Communist Party control. The architects of Doi Moi understood a crucial lesson from their long history's successful adaptation. requires embracing useful foreign influences while preserving core identity. Vietnam's economic miracle rivaled those of South Korea and Taiwan. GDP growth averaged over 7% annually for decades. Foreign companies discovered Vietnamese workers possessed the same discipline and skill that had defeated empires. Samsung, Intel, and countless manufacturers established major operations, making Vietnam a crucial link in global supply chains. But perhaps most remarkably, Vietnam achieved this transformation while maintaining political stability. Unlike Eastern European communist states that collapsed amid economic transition, Vietnam's leaders managed gradual reform that avoided social upheaval. They applied the same patient, long-term thinking that had won military victories to economic development. The results speak for themselves. Vietnam became the world's second-largest coffee producer, a major rice exporter, and a manufacturing powerhouse. Cities that were battlefields in the 1970s became centers of international commerce. The country that had been synonymous with war became associated with economic dynamism and growth. Today's Vietnam bears little resemblance to the 1960s battlefield. This is a young, dynamic country where over half the population was born after the war ended. They focus on economic opportunities rather than military conflicts, building the future rather than reliving the past. Yet the lessons learned through centuries of struggle, discipline, unity, adaptability, and unwavering determination remain the foundation of modern Vietnamese success. So what was that secret weapon I mentioned at the beginning? It wasn't advanced technology or superior numbers. It was something far more powerful, the unbreakable Vietnamese spirit that refused to accept defeat, refused to be conquered, and never stopped believing in their right to independence and self-determination. Throughout their long history, Vietnamese leaders understood a fundamental truth that escaped their enemies. Wars are won not by those with the most sophisticated weapons, but by those with the strongest will to endure. Whether facing Chinese legions, Mongol cavalry, French artillery, or American bombers, the Vietnamese consistently demonstrated that determination trumps technology, that patience defeats impatience, and that those fighting for their homeland possess advantages that no foreign army can match. The story of Vietnam teaches us that history isn't determined by great powers alone, but by ordinary people who possess extraordinary courage. It shows us that the human spirit, when properly motivated and skillfully led, can overcome seemingly impossible odds. From the legendary Trung sisters to Ho Chi Minh, from General Tran Hung Dao to the farmers who fought American helicopters with rifles, Vietnam's heroes prove that freedom isn't granted, it's earned through sacrifice, struggle, and an unshakable belief in justice. But Vietnam's greatest lesson may be its demonstration that victory in war means nothing without victory in peace. The same nation that defeated superpowers has now mastered the art of economic development, showing the world that the qualities that make great warriors, discipline, unity, strategic thinking, and perseverance, also make great builders of prosperity. As we watch Vietnam continue its remarkable journey from war-torn battlefield to economic powerhouse, we're witnessing the final chapter of one of history's most inspiring stories. The dragon that once breathed fire against invaders now soars through global markets, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of a people who never forgot that their greatest strength lay not in their weapons, but in their unbreakable spirit. Vietnam's history reminds us that no matter how dark the night, no matter how overwhelming the odds, the human desire for freedom and dignity can never be permanently suppressed. In a world still struggling with conflicts and divisions, Vietnam stands as proof that even the deepest wounds can heal. Even the bitterest enemies can become partners, and even the most devastated nations can rise again to claim their place among the world's success stories.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more interesting videos.